It was the morning of June 11, 2021, when something strange was caught on London's numerous surveillance cameras. A woman, walking with a determined stride, pulling a substantial blue suitcase. The wheels bumped along the side street as she went about her journey before tucking into a northwest London home. There she would stay for the next few hours, out of sight. While this may seem innocent enough, what was going on behind those walls was like something straight out of a horror movie. When the woman reappears, she now has 2 suitcases, and the blue one from before now seems far heavier. Gemma Mitchell was born on July 22, 1984, in Australia. Her mother was born in England before moving to Australia in 1983. It was there that she met Gemma's father. The marriage was short-lived, and when Gemma was still a young child, her mom returned to her home country with her 2 daughters. Gemma went on to study human sciences at King's College London, a public research university. She was a diligent student who loved her work. She completed her degree with honors and decided to continue her education. Gemma attended the British School of Osteopathy, now known as University College of Osteopathy.
You are clearly a highly intelligent woman, having obtained first-class honours in 2006 in human sciences from King's College London, and then gone on to qualify as an osteopath.
What is osteopathy? It is an alternative medicine that focuses on the musculoskeletal system's role in your health. However, the research on its effectiveness is limited. Nevertheless, Gemma believed it would be beneficial, and she earned her certification. Her next step was to move back to Australia, where she set up a small osteopathic practice in Melbourne. In 2015, Gemma moved back to the UK and moved in with her mother. It seemed Gemma and her mother were living a rather comfortable life. They lived together in a large northwest London home with an estimated worth somewhere between £1 and £4 million. It had been passed down through the generations, but behind the scenes, life was far from lavish. The interior rooms were all packed to the brim with items, indicating that one, if not both of the 2, had hoarding issues. There were boxes and suitcases, freezers full of food, old mattresses and building materials everywhere. The kitchen was dirty, with rotting food on the stove, and messy, with paperwork covering the surfaces. A law enforcement officer later stated. The bathroom was stained and in a poor state of repair. The place looked like a hoarder's residence. Gemma was no longer working, and her mother lived off of a retirement fund. Things were tight financially. Since she couldn't work as an osteopath due to not having the relevant UK registration, Gemma decided to brand herself as a healer. She claimed to have a magic touch and told anyone who would listen that she could solve a number of issues. Around this time, Gemma began attending an evangelical church in North London, where she met a woman called Mi Kwen Chong, who went by the name Deborah. Gemma and her mom both knew their home needed renovations, and they began looking for contractors. Even though neither of them had a steady income, they had a fair amount of savings and were able to borrow money. However, instead of focusing on making sure the rooms were clean and updated, Gemma and her mother wanted to build a 3rd floor. The 2 builders they selected for the job quoted Hillary and Gemma £230,000 to complete the build. They decided to go ahead and transfer the money. The already unwise decision soon turned out to have disastrous consequences. One of the 2 builders, who was paid £130,000 for the work, had filed for bankruptcy before the job was completed. This meant that Hillary and Gemma had no way of recovering their funds. To make matters worse, they were quoted an additional £500,000 to complete the job.
You lived together in a large property in North London, and the 2 of you decided to add an upper floor to the house. This proved to be your undoing. You and your mother paid a total of £230,000 to 2 builders, one of whom evidently cheated you, and you were thereby exhausted of a large part of your resources. But the work remained substantially unfinished, and the house was left without a roof and covered in scaffolding.
Gemma was able to come up with an additional £100,000, but she was unable to come up with the outstanding £400,000 needed. Since he hadn't been paid, the builder didn't complete the work. Over £300,000 had been spent on a failed upgrade, leaving the home with missing sections of roofing and no heating. Gemma needed to get money, and she needed it fast.
Deborah was born in Malaysia. Through her own hard work and initiative, she made a good life for herself, finally settling in London, where she was a much valued and loved member of the community. The jury's heard that her later years were marred by poor mental health, but that throughout this time she never lost her firm religious beliefs, nor her belief in the goodness of charity.
Mi Quen Chong was born in Malaysia in the mid-1950s. After crossing paths with Gemma at church, they quickly became friends. Deborah lived in Wembley, northwest London, just 4 miles away from Gemma's home. Deborah called this specific residence her home for more than 30 years, and the majority of those years were spent alongside her spouse. After his passing, Deborah invited a tenant to live with her. She was a rather affluent woman who was said to be extremely liberal with her funds. Deborah was known to be quick to lend money when she heard of someone needing support. Unfortunately, this was a trait that could be taken advantage of. Deborah reportedly offered her home to multiple people, though they could see that Deborah was not in the right frame of mind. After she lost her husband, Deborah's mental health deteriorated. She was considered to be vulnerable by authorities. After being admitted for mental health care, Deborah was given a diagnosis of schizophrenia. She spent some time receiving care in a psychiatric ward before being released on medication. After they met, Gemma and Deborah began messaging constantly. Gemma told Deborah about her healing abilities, but it took some time before Deborah believed Gemma could help her. When Gemma found out about Deborah's schizophrenia diagnosis, she convinced the vulnerable pensioner that she could cure her mental illness. Eventually, Deborah believed she was being healed.
She was a woman of some means, and the evidence showed that she was extremely generous. Unfortunately, she had a history of serious mental illness, having been diagnosed some years ago with paranoid schizophrenia, and she had spent some months as an inpatient at a mental hospital.
The discussion of Deborah's house came up in their conversation just weeks into their new friendship. It began in September 2022 when Deborah told Gemma she wanted to leave her house to charity. Since she trusted Gemma, she asked her opinion on this idea. One such email from Deborah to Gemma read, "I am honored to have you as my sister. Accept me as your friend and advise me." Her reasoning for giving it to a charity was so that they would get the asset without having to pay any inheritance tax. However, Gemma suggested another idea. She told Deborah that if she formed her own charity, Deborah could leave the house to her. Of course, for Gemma, this would leave her with a whole additional property, one that she hadn't paid a cent for. Deborah, though, was thinking about giving her home to a cause that would make a difference, not to one singular person. Seeing Deborah's reluctance, Gemma changed her proposal. If Deborah signed the house into her name, then Gemma would make a donation to a charity of her choice once a month. She was pulling out all the stops to get what she wanted. A few months went by, and the pair continued their frequent conversations. This is when Gemma began talking about the nightmare that her home renovations had become. After telling Deborah every frustrating detail, and likely expressing how much money she had lost, Deborah's suggestion was that Gemma look into hiring a different set of builders. But after that, Deborah offered to help pay the outstanding amount for the repairs herself. One condition was that Deborah meet Gemma's mother. She wanted to know who she was helping, and in December, the meeting went ahead. They got on well, and Deborah told the paid that she could gift them £200,000 on condition that Gemma hold Christian worship sessions there. Gemma didn't need to think twice about the offer and readily agreed. It seemed like Gemma's luck was changing. It's not often you meet someone who is willing to give you that sort of money, and given the state of her home, she was in desperate need of it. But in early 2021, things started to fall apart. Deborah went through another mental health crisis, and she was admitted into the care of her local mental health organization. At the time, Deborah had formed an obsession with Prince Charles, thinking he was going to marry her. As part of her treatment program, Deborah was placed on a new antipsychotic drug in May. This was clearly not an easy time for Deborah. To make matters worse, her physical health wasn't in the greatest shape either. A major side effect of the medication Deborah was now on was a different outlook on things around her. Of course, this is to be expected when one has been battling with an untreated mental illness. She had somewhat of an epiphany about the whole Gemma situation. Deborah was no longer interested in giving Gemma any money, and rather suggested she look into selling her own home. "Sell it, enjoy the money. Life is too short," she said in an email. To which Gemma responded, "This isn't God's plan." Things were now strained with Deborah not interested in backing down from her decision. Possibly, the new medication had given her some clarity over the situation. In the early morning hours of June 8, 2021, Deborah emailed Gemma to say, "Until you sold house, I won't want you to come to me or my house. I'm stressed to the core." Still, Gemma persisted that God had a plan. Deborah responded by saying, "Live one day at a time. You will die before dreams and visions start to establish." In the early evening of June 11th, Deborah's tenant arrived home from work to find she was not home. This had practically never happened before, and when she was still not back after a few hours, he decided to call the authorities. He was unable to reach her and had previously last seen Deborah the night before. Worryingly, her glasses and cell phone were found in the home. Knowing of her mental health struggles and physical weakness, the tenant was concerned for her well-being. The authorities took the missing person report and began to try and track Deborah down. The media showed little interest in her disappearance, though. Media attention is often crucial in cases like these, but far more missing people fall through the cracks than ones who make the front pages. For the next 2 weeks, there was no sign of Deborah, and then a body was found. On June 27, 2021, a family was on holiday in the coastal town of Salcombe in Devon. It was supposed to be a relaxing summer vacation by the sea, but it ended far differently. On that morning, they set off down a public footpath when they reached a small set of stairs. There, they stumbled across human remains not far off the track. Shielding the children, the emergency line was called and the discovery reported. When the authorities arrived on the scene, they found something incredibly disturbing.
That grim discovery was made all the worse by the fact that her head had been cut off. It was not found until a number of days later, some 10 meters away from the body, further down the hill beneath some undergrowth.
The body was without a head. Further searches of the area uncovered it nearby in the undergrowth. Forensic examinations identified the woman as 67-year-old Deborah Chong. After finding out she had recently been reported missing, the investigators needed to answer the question of how Deborah had ended up in Salcombe, 200 miles away from her home. The level of decomposition meant that minimal evidence was obtained, and an exact cause of death could not be determined. The coroner's report did note a fractured skull and several rib fractures. The police appealed to anyone who had seen Deborah prior to her death or knew something that could shed light on the past 2 weeks to come forward. After going through Deborah's phone and seeing her frequent contact with Gemma, she quickly popped up as someone to talk to. The police had a murder investigation on their hands, and there was one person they wanted to speak to, Gemma Mitchell. So, what had Gemma Mitchell been doing on the day Deborah disappeared? On June 11th, Gemma is seen on CCTV wearing a black backpack, leaving her Willesden home and pulling a large blue suitcase. From how Gemma is pulling the suitcase, it seems fairly obvious that it is empty. As she exits her gate, she lifts the bag with ease before she starts wheeling it down the street at a brisk pace. Thanks to the countless CCTV cameras across northwest London, Gemma's path can be tracked with relative ease. She's heading for Wembley, the same neighborhood that Deborah lives in. When Gemma is in Deborah's neighborhood, she is spotted again, but this time with a mask pulled up over her face and a change of clothes. She has placed the backpack into the suitcase. This disguise, if you could even call it that, was completely ineffective. The person's height and build matched that of Gemma, and more importantly, she was still pulling that large, bright blue suitcase, not something you see every day. She reaches her destination at roughly 8 a.m. in the morning and can be seen returning home 5 hours later with the blue suitcase in tow. Only this time, it appears to be full. After Deborah was found deceased and her remains were identified, investigators turned their attention to tracing her last known movements. When doing so, they spotted the mysterious person with the blue suitcase, Gemma Mitchell. They followed Gemma's movements back to her home before seeing nothing of note in the footage over the next 2 weeks, until the suitcase makes another appearance on June 26th as Gemma loads it into her vehicle. Pay close attention to how much she struggles to lift it. The investigators had a feeling right away that something wasn't right there. Gemma was seen walking to Deborah's house with a loaded suitcase on the day she was last seen before leaving. The footage from Deborah's street showed she never walked out of her house, so how did her body end up all the way in Salcombe? By now, I'm sure you've put the pieces of the puzzle together.
Police! Hello there.
Hello, how are you?
Yeah, good. There's no answer. Sorry, what's your name?
Sorry, we were asleep.
Are you Gemma?
Yeah, I am.
Okay, Gemma. Just put your hand a second.
Should I
Come on, come on a second.
Sorry, can I
Gemma, do you want to come up?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I just want to see them.
Hand just so your hands. Alright, Gemma, at this moment, I'm arresting you on suspicion of murder. Okay, you don't have to say anything, but you may have a defence, do not mention one question, something which you later rely in court. Anything you do say may be given evidence, okay? Once we're in your cuffs.
Am I allowed to...
I'll go explain everything to you. Okay?
Should I get some
Yeah,
shoes?
sorry. What?
If you want to one sec.
Inside?
Who's inside at the moment?
Mother.
Your mother? Okay.
Is it?
If you want to... Oh, can someone lift that up?
Yeah. Let's step back inside.
Is anyone else inside? Just your mum?
Yeah.
There is someone else inside,
No,
or just
that's
your
just
mum?
my mum, yeah.
Alright, do you want to... Should I bring her out, or...?
On July 6th, 2021, Gemma Mitchell was arrested on suspicion of murder and taken into custody by the Metropolitan Police. Throughout her questioning, Gemma remained defiant, responding no comment to each question asked.
Stunk of a dead person.
No comment.
Stunk of Deborah's decomposing body. Is that right, Gemma?
No comment.
On July 10th, she was taken to Bronzefield Prison to await her charges. On September 28th, at Gemma's plea hearing, she pleaded not guilty, and her trial was set for September 26, 2022. However, strike action caused a slight delay, and proceedings began on October 11th. Deanna Heer KC led the prosecution, and Richard Jory KC led the defense. Judge Richard Marks KC oversaw the proceedings. This is what the prosecution and the authorities believe happened to Deborah Chong. The jury was shown the video footage of Gemma entering Deborah's home shortly after 8 a.m. on June 11th and then leaving at 1:13 p.m. that afternoon. The prosecution highlighted the fact that Gemma was attuned to subjects in neuroanatomy, genetics, and dissection of human cadavers, given her education and since she was a trained osteopath. Basically, they implied she was the type of person who would know how to dismember a body. Once Gemma arrived at Deborah's house, she attacked her. While some say this was following an altercation between the women, that doesn't factor in Gemma walking over with the empty large blue suitcase that Deborah's body would be transported in. That indicates that Gemma went to Deborah's home with the intention of killing her. This was no argument that had grown out of hand. After killing Deborah by bludgeoning her, Gemma then decapitated her and stuffed her body into the suitcase she had brought with her. The medical examiner theorized that this may have been when Deborah's ribs were broken. Gemma spent the next few hours in the home, probably cleaning up the scene, but also collecting important documents relating to Deborah's assets. She packed these papers up in a separate suitcase that she found at Deborah's home shortly after 1 p.m. before leaving. Later that same evening, Gemma visited St. Thomas Hospital to get treatment for her broken finger. She told doctors that she had slammed it in a door, Gemma's use of the documents she stole further alluded to the fact that this had been planned ahead. In the days following Deborah's murder, Gemma tried to forge the elder woman's will so that she would get the majority of Deborah's estate. Obviously, she would ultimately be unsuccessful, but once again, Gemma's greed shone through for the prosecution. They also revealed to the court that when police initially called to ask her about Deborah's whereabouts, she told them that she was depressed and had gone to stay somewhere close to the ocean with family friends. All the while, Deborah's body was sitting in Gemma's garden. For the next 2 weeks, Gemma kept Deborah's body in the suitcase in her overgrown garden. Then, using Deborah's phone that she had turned off on the day of the murder, Gemma hired a car on June 26th and drove to Salcombe to dump Deborah's remains. It was a 200-mile drive from London, one that would have taken over 4 hours to complete. Once there, Gemma disposed of Deborah's body along a woodland trail at the bottom of a set of rock stairs. She then got rid of Deborah's head further in the undergrowth. Gemma returned home with the suitcase in tow and tried to hide it on the roof of her neighbor's garden shed. When police found it, they had it DNA tested and surprisingly found there was no DNA evidence from Deborah inside, though a small towel soaked with blood was found in one of the pockets. That blood was confirmed to belong to Deborah Chong. Inside Gemma's home, police found the documents she had taken from Deborah's home. Some reports suggest the forged will leave Gemma 95% of Deborah's assets and her mother the remaining 5%. With everything pointing to Gemma's guilt, her defense team had a tough task ahead of them. Gemma declined the opportunity to testify on her own behalf. Richard Jory KC stated there was no evidence to show Deborah was ever in the suitcase, pointing to the lack of DNA found inside the luggage. He then pointed to the lack of evidence of a struggle at Deborah's house to counter the claim that Gemma had murdered her there. However, the prosecution argued that her broken finger counted as evidence of a struggle. Each side rested their cases, and on October 21st, the jury was sent to deliberate their verdict. They spent 7 hours discussing everything they had heard before reaching an agreement. Gemma Mitchell was found guilty of the murder of Deborah Chong. This news was accompanied by reports that Gemma's sentencing would be televised live, making her the first woman to ever have her sentence filmed.
The enormity of your crime is profoundly shocking, even more so given your apparent religious devotion, as well as the fact that Deborah Chong was a good friend to you and had shown you great kindness.
The hearing took place on October 28th, with people from Deborah's family being given an opportunity to give victim impact statements. Her sister appeared on a video link from Malaysia and said the following: "We still do not understand how she died. Did she suffer? This mystery will haunt me forever." Then came the time for Judge Richard Marks KC to reveal what Gemma Mitchell was facing for her crimes.
Gemma Mitchell, I have to sentence you for the murder on the 11th of June of last year of Mi Quen, otherwise known as Deborah Chong, of which you were convicted by the jury yesterday.
The judge didn't hold back during the sentencing, describing Gemma as extremely devious. He went on to say, "There is the chilling aspect of what you did to and with her body after you killed her. You have shown absolutely no remorse, and it appears you are in complete denial as to what you did, notwithstanding what, in my judgment, amounted to overwhelming evidence against you."
The fact that you had experience in the dissection of human bodies, that no doubt stood you in good stead when you cut off Deborah's head, although why you chose to do that remains a mystery.
In the end, Judge Marks sentenced Gemma to life imprisonment, which carries a minimum term of 34 years. She will remain behind bars until 2055 and will be approaching 70 years old by the time she is eligible for parole. Unfortunately for Gemma, London's CCTV cameras made it impossible for her to get away with murder. She now gets to spend the next 3 decades behind bars, hopefully haunted by the heinous crimes she committed.